I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. Thank you for our panelists for coming to testify. I know this is a very important topic, reforming procurement to accelerate defense innovation. It's obviously important because we have a lot of threats around the world who are developing their weaponry very quickly, and the battlefield is ever changing. We also have a Defense Department that has a massive budget. We all know that. We also have a Defense Department here that continues to fail audits. But I want to start with you, Ms. Boatner. You previously served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Strategy and Acquisition Reform. Is that correct? Acquisition reforms are important, but I'm also concerned about the revolving door of senior military and procurement offices leaving the DoD and taking jobs at large defense contractors. With their influence, they are able to leverage military relationships to negatively influence procurement. One example of bad procurement practices is retired Rear Admiral James A. Murdoch and retired Captain Tony Parisi used their influence to fund the procurement of the Navy's infamous Littoral Combat Ship and the Defense Civilian Human Resource Management System Software Development Program that was 6 years behind schedule and more than $280 million, that's 780% over budget, until Secretary Pete Hegseth announced its termination. The work of these former military officers on the LCS ship resulted in the procurement and continued deployment of flawed ships that cost the taxpayer billions of dollars and put crew members at risk. Undoubtedly, someone continued to champion the Defense Civilian Human Resource Management System otherwise it would have ended a long time ago. My question, how do we ensure that the hiring and work reforms for some of the acquisition officers so U.S. taxpayers aren't holding the bill for failed projects like the Littoral Combat Ship or the Defense Civilian Human Resource Management System software, ma'am?
Absolutely. I think it's an important point. There are restrictions in place for folks leaving the department and going elsewhere so that they cannot use kind of their information or relationships to push contracts in any given way. I think, to the best of my knowledge, myself and others comply with those restrictions. And specifically to contracts, if you've ever touched a specific contract or even that portfolio area, you are prevented from being involved in any of those discussions with that agency for different periods of time moving forward.
What are those time periods, Ms. Boatner?
Depending on the level of position that you held, they range from 2 years and can go higher. Different presidents have set different specific year-long restrictions, cooling off periods based on their administrations.
Do you think those time periods should be increased?
I think that's probably not a call that I should make, but should leave it to Congress to determine in the executive branch.
If that is the case, how did this example that I just read with the Littoral Combat Ship happen in your estimation, ma'am?
Again, I don't know the specific details of that. Potentially, perhaps the right restrictions were not in place, but I'm really not familiar with that particular situation.
Ms. Oakley, would you like to take a stab at that?
I'm also not familiar how that particular example happened, but the approaches that we're talking about today to advocate for change within the department could play a role in limiting the ability for something like that to happen. So in these new approaches, you're not locking in these long-term contracts on these big mammoth acquisition programs that then you're stuck with one vendor for in perpetuity. These new approaches would enable shorter term contracts that focus on an initial capability and then be able to open up the aperture for competition through things like modular open systems, et cetera, that would enable other companies to get involved. And so I think, I'm kind of tangentially answering your question, but what we're talking about today would help to prevent the situations like you're talking about.
Thank you. I'd also like to submit for the record an article from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. It's called March of the Four-Star Generals, the Role of Retired Generals and Admirals in the Arms Industry, and I'd like to read a quick section. In another prominent case, General
Without objection, so ordered. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. In another prominent case, General James Mattis went to bat for the blood testing firm Thoronis while he was serving as commander of the U.S. Central Command, then joined the company's board upon leaving government service. Mattis pressed the Army to buy the utilized Theranos equipment, as he acknowledged in an email to Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes, uncovered by the Washington Post. It basically goes on to say that Theranos was later charged, 2 of their executives were charged from the Securities and Exchange Commission, described Theranos as an elaborate, years-long fraud in which Holmes exaggerated or made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performances. And on that, I yield back.
Thank you.